before Rome ruled the world, before Caesar ever wore his crown. There was a man who made the mighty republic tremble, a man born not in Europe, but in Africa, a man whose name became the stuff of fear and legend, Hannibal of Carthage. To Rome, he was a monster. To Africa, he was a hero, the son of Carthage, the empire that rose from the sands of Tunisia to command the seas of the Mediterranean. This is not just the story of war. It's the story of an African genius, a strategist, who changed history forever, long before Rome became an empire. Carthage was already won, founded by Phoenician settlers from Tyre, in modern-day Lebanon. Carthage grew into a mighty African power, its heart beating on the coast of Tunisia. It was a city of dazzling wealth, with marble streets, towering harbors, and temples rising over the blue Mediterranean. Its merchants ruled the seas, its ships explored from Spain to Senegal, and its people, a fusion of African Berber and Phoenician blood, built one of the most advanced civilizations in history. Carthage was Africa's first great maritime empire, long before Rome, long before Europe's age of conquest. Carthage mastered trade like no other. Gold from the Sahara, ivory from the interior, tin from Spain, and purple dye from Tyre filled its markets. The city had two massive harbors, one for trade and another for its navy. Together, they made Carthage invincible at sea. But as Carthage's wealth grew, so did Rome's jealousy. Rome ruled land, Carthage ruled water, and soon both would collide in the 3rd century BCE. The Mediterranean wasn't a sea of peace, it was a battlefield of ambitions. Rome wanted to expand beyond Italy. Carthage wanted to protect its trade routes. The result? The Punic Wars, 3 brutal conflicts that would decide who would rule the ancient world. The first war ended in bitter defeat for Carthage. Rome took Sicily, and the balance of power began to shift. But from the ashes of that loss, a new generation of warriors was born, and among them was a boy named Hannibal Barca. Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, was more than a general. He was the embodiment of Carthage's pride, a man who had fought Rome to the bitter end, and carried the scars of that struggle in his heart. When the wars ended and Carthage was forced to kneel, Hamilcar did not forgive. He turned to his young son, barely 9 years old, and led him to a sacred altar. There, before the gods of Carthage, he made Hannibal place his hand upon the sacrifice and swear an oath that would shape the destiny of nations, never to be a friend to Rome. That oath was not just a promise, it became Hannibal's purpose. It burned within him as he grew, sharpening his mind and soul for the war that was to come. He studied every art of battle, from cavalry maneuvers to mountain warfare, from elephants to ambushes. But Hannibal was more than a soldier. He was a thinker, a tactician, a master of strategy, deception, and patience. Rome had power, but Hannibal would prove that brilliance could outmatch empire. As the oath burned within him, Hannibal's destiny unfolded quickly. By his 20s, he was no longer just the son of Hamilcar. He was commander of Carthage's forces in Spain, the heir to his father's unfinished war. There, far from the city of Carthage, Hannibal proved that leadership was not about birth, but about brilliance. He united warriors from across Africa and Iberia under one banner. Numidians from what is now Algeria, Libyans from the deserts of North Africa, Moors from the western lands, and Iberians from Spain, all marched together, loyal to the same cause. But what made Hannibal different was not just his victories. It was the way he led. He didn't command from a throne or hide behind generals. He rode with his men. He ate what they ate, slept where they slept, and when they bled in battle, he bled beside them. He ruled not through fear, but through respect. His soldiers followed him not because they had to, but because they believed in him. He was not a distant ruler. He was a warrior among warriors. And when his army stood assembled before him, it wasn't just a Carthaginian army. It was a reflection of Africa itself, diverse, united, and unstoppable. This was not merely the army of one city, but of a continent's spirit, a symbol of African genius and unity. In 218 BCE, Hannibal made the impossible decision to attack Rome, not from the sea, but from the Alps. He would lead tens of thousands of men, horses, and war elephants across freezing mountains that no army had ever crossed before. Scholars said it was suicide. Hannibal said it was destiny. For 15 days, his army battled storms, hunger, and ambushes. Elephants slipped off icy cliffs. Soldiers froze in their sleep. But when the survivors emerged, the Romans had never seen anything like it. An African army had crossed the Alps. Their general was not a barbarian. He was a master of war. In a matter of months, Hannibal crushed 3 Roman armies. At Trebia, he lured them into icy rivers. At Lake Trasimene, he trapped 30,000 men in fog. And at Cannae, he delivered the greatest tactical victory in ancient history. 50,000 Romans died in a single day. The Republic was broken. Rome shook in terror. Hannibal's true weapon wasn't his sword, it was his mind. He studied terrain like a mathematician, read the psychology of his enemies, and used deception like art. He invented envelopment tactics, used feigned retreats, and made Rome bleed without ever attacking its walls. Even centuries later, military leaders like Napoleon and Patton studied Hannibal's campaigns. They called him the father of strategy. Hannibal wasn't fighting alone. From Numidia, modern Algeria, came cavalry so fast, the Romans could never outrun them. From the Atlas Mountains came Berber, warriors who fought fiercely for Carthage. Africa stood behind him. For once, the continent's armies were united, not in conquest, but in defense. Carthage was Africa's shield against European expansion. For nearly 16 years, Hannibal fought Rome on its own soil and never lost a single battle. But Carthage's politicians grew fearful. They refused to send reinforcements. Meanwhile, Rome adapted, learning from Hannibal's own tactics. At last, the Romans struck back in Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home. At Zama, in 202 BCE, Hannibal faced Rome's new commander Scipio Africanus. The battle was fierce. Elephants charged, cavalry clashed, but without support. Carthage fell, defeated but unbroken. Hannibal fled into exile. He traveled across the Eastern world, offering his wisdom to kings and scholars. Even his enemies respected him. They called him the greatest commander who ever lived. But Rome would never forget. Years later, they hunted him down, and rather than surrender, Hannibal took poison. His final words were said to be, "Let us relieve the Romans from their long anxiety, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." After Hannibal's death, Carthage tried to rebuild, but Rome was relentless. In 146 BCE, Roman legions surrounded the city. For 3 years, Carthage resisted. Women and children fought alongside soldiers. When the city finally fell, Rome burned it to the ground for 17 days. They said the earth was salted so nothing would ever grow again. But Carthage's spirit could not be destroyed. For centuries, Rome and Europe told the story. They made Hannibal a foreign enemy, erasing his African roots. They said Carthage was Phoenician, as if Africa had no part in it. But the truth runs deeper. Carthage was African, built on African soil, by African hands. With African soldiers, Hannibal was not just a general, he was Africa's first global strategist. Long after his death, Hannibal's influence lived on. He inspired the Moors, who later crossed into Spain. He shaped military science for 2,000 years. Every great commander, from Napoleon to Eisenhower, studied his art of war. But beyond strategy, Hannibal left a message that Africa once produced men who could challenge the world's mightiest powers and win. Today, in Tunisia, the ruins of Carthage still whisper his name. In Algeria, murals still depict his march across the Alps. and in every corner of Africa's memory, Hannibal remains a symbol of brilliance and resistance. He was more than a warrior. He was a lesson that Africa's story was never one of weakness, but of power, intellect, and pride. Before Europe rose, before Rome ruled, Africa had already conquered minds and empires.